Is there anything that you recommend that when we do start to feel that guilt because we've started to speak our truth, that we can start to move through a little bit easier?
I love just that you're naming it.
Is there any biggest misconceptions around the fawn response that we can sort of hear from day to day? Do you hear that in your work that keeps people stuck in that response?
Well, I think there's a lot of misconceptions. I think some of those being
How can we know the difference between fawning or just being nice?
Oh, it's such a good question.
Can chronic people pleasing lead to illness, burnout? Dr. Ingrid Clayton, what is a fawn response and how is that formed?
Wow, I love that. What is the fawn response? The fawn response is a relational trauma response. Sometimes relational trauma is called complex trauma or developmental trauma, childhood trauma. All of these are under that umbrella. And it's where you merge with, mirror, some people call it people pleasing. It's when you try to attend to the needs of others as a way to keep yourself relationally safe. And the reason I particularly like the language of the fawn response is that it really is embedded in the lens and language of trauma, which means it's embodied, right? There's a reason that we do these things. We're not just, people running around with low self-esteem who just love caretaking people all the time. It's really rooted in this deeper understanding of why these things emerge, that these behaviors emerge not consciously, right? They're driven through our need to survive the environments that we've been living in.
And how would that be formed when we're younger by our caregivers? What is that? What type of responses would we go through? Would we go through a fight, a flight, and then a freeze, or then would we jump into a fawn? Like, how does that start to set up?
Different people talk about it differently. So some would say that the body will prioritize fight or flight first, which are sort of our very active, mobilizing. It's the, sympathetic nervous system response first. But when you're talking about children, we don't really have an option to fight our caregivers. You don't really have an option to flee, most of us. Where are you going to go? So the body does this amazing thing where it prioritizes the trauma response that has the most chance of success, and it does it in a nanosecond, and it chooses for us, right? This is not a conscious choice. Like I'm like, should I run? It's like the body goes, I am not safe. My aggressor, my perpetrator, is the person who is responsible for my well-being. I need to make them happy, right? So in my own case, I am a childhood trauma survivor. It looked differently depending on who the adult was in any given moment. So if it's my stepdad, who's the predator, he's sort of coming for me, it starts to look like, no, we're good, right? Like there's this, I have to pretend that I like him. I do not like him, but I need him to like me so that I don't get squashed, essentially. On the other hand, with my mom, who was a bit of an enabler in this case, why did I soften it by a bit? She was an enabler in this case. My fawn response is the person who's responsible for me is absent. I need to almost lend her my own coping, my own functioning. This is where the caretaking comes in. It's almost like I need to pull her back to life, right? I'm more responsible for her than she is for herself. So the fawn response really can show up differently with different people, but in essence, it's about trying to find our own center that includes the other. And like I said, the other person can have different motivations and different needs, but we don't have a sense of autonomy, right? We don't have a sense of true agency. It's, I need you to survive. So what do I need to do to bridge the gap?
How did you get into this body of work?
Surviving my childhood, essentially. I mean, I was just writing something for the foreword of my new book on the fawn response. And I recalled that when I was 13 years old, when all my friends were writing their first research papers on, fun topics like snowboarding, I grew up in the mountains of Colorado. The topic of my paper, Ryan, was alcoholism, the family disease. So I've been trying to climb out from this thing that has plagued me in very various forms my entire life, right? It's like no wonder that I went and became a clinical psychologist. But I will say that even decades into doing all of that work, I did not understand really relational trauma. And in part, that's because of my training. I think as a field, we're only really starting to understand that trauma isn't just the assault, the car crash, the natural disaster, these obvious things, right? But that complex trauma is the day-to-day experience, the like pervasive cuts to your psyche over time, that they manifest similarly in the body. And so for a long time, even as a clinician in the field, I continued to gaslight myself going, well, my experience wasn't that bad, right? Like maybe I'm being a little too sensitive. Maybe I need to try harder. And it wasn't until 8 or 10 years ago now, I'm losing track of time, but my stepdad died. And in his absence on this planet, my entire history sort of came looking for me, largely in the middle of the night, brought me to this very kitchen table where I'm sitting, and I had to write and write and write and write. And after many years of this process, I saw all these stories that emerged, not only just of my childhood, but of then where those experiences took me, right? Of someone who in particular had this chronic fawn response, right? So if I learned safety in this particular way in childhood and I had to do it day in and day out, guess what I did day in and day out for the rest of my life, right? So now, all these years later, after sitting on a million therapist couches, after being clean and sober for almost, 2 or 3 decades, somewhere in there, doing all this work, I could finally see on the page through a trauma therapist's eyes, oh my gosh, I have complex PTSD and I didn't know it. So it was just this powerful awakening. And I thought, if I have all this information and all this training and I didn't know, right? I'm still gaslighting myself thinking, Ingrid, come on, right? Get over it already. How many people are living this way? And so I finished that writing and I wrote a memoir on complex trauma. And the deeper that I have dived into this work, the freer I have become. And it just becomes this cyclical thing where I go, oh, we've unlocked this other nuance over here and we're taking back agency over here. And I feel this strong calling to continue to share that with other survivors, because a lot of us have been stuck, truly stuck and blamed for so long.
Yeah. Well, thank you for your work, and thank you for all those times you sat up and decided to write all of that down, because that is such a gift to the rest of the world for people that are still trying to figure that out. The biggest thing that I hear is my parents did the best that they could, and it's sort of a disowning of even how uncomfortable it could have been in their childhood as well at the same time. And it's the dripping tap of these things that we're not aware of that are slowly, like you said, coming into our psyche that then forms this. But why do some people grow up into a fight response predominantly, or run from the situation and feel that flight energy? And then why do some people then get stuck into a fawn response? Now, I know that we can move through all of these responses, of course, but there's ones that are predisposed to, that we go to firstly with certain individuals or certain people. Why does that sort of tend to happen? Why do we not all as children go out into the world as fawns, or do we?
Well, I think fawn is a predominant response for childhood trauma, just because you're so disempowered as a child, right? Like, to have that agency isn't really available for a lot of folks. But that's not to say I also had a fight response, right? So another example of that is I told the counselor at school what was going on. That's an aspect of a healthy fight response. This is wrong and I need help. And what happened to me in that moment is what also happens to a lot of people, not just in childhood, but is that I was basically told, Ingrid, you're a liar and you're selfish, and I think that you've made it all up, right? So having a voice and standing up for myself made it worse. It made it worse. And that's what happens in all kinds of different ways where people either fight or flee, right? You're dragged back. Only now, they got their clutches in you because they know that you're a runner, right? Or you fight back, and guess what? The bigger people are bigger and they harm you. And so that's one of the reasons I think fawn is so common for childhood trauma survivors. But to your other point, like, all of our trauma responses are equal opportunity defenders. So the body chooses the one that it thinks will work at each moment in time. I was listening to Armchair Expert podcast with Dax Shepard, right? So maybe similar to you, he's a big guy, right? He's 6'2" and he's like a bodybuilder. And they were talking about the fawn response on this episode with Anna Kendrick. And he flashes back to, I think he said he was maybe 12 years old. He goes, I know the fawn response. And immediately there's this example of a guy who's coming for him and he's, beating his head on the side of the car. And Dax goes, dude, bro, we're good. I would never, right? He starts flattering this man. And this is the thing that really got me, is he went on to say that the shame of doing that, essentially the shame of having to fawn, was worse than the event itself. And I think that is true for so many of us, right? The way that our body responds, it's both life-saving, thank God for it, and it doubles down on the shame that we're already holding from our experiences. That's so painful, which, as an aside, is the reason I'm so careful about language with trauma survivors, because man, we're holding so much already. But then he goes on to say, I'm so glad I grew out of that. In other words, becoming a 6'2" tall man with muscles and, money, essentially, he could fight back. And I thought, man, so many of us never get that big, right? Half of us are women, many people of color, all the marginalized communities. You just start looking at all these different contexts and settings where you're not at the top of the food chain, right? You're not at the top of the food chain. So it's context dependent, it's body dependent. And I think fawning is like threading this very fine needle of trying to stitch together all of those lived experiences at the same time, right? Like, how do I stay safe in these conditions?
Thank you so much for sharing that. That was extremely powerful, and I can resonate with that man's journey.
I was wondering, I was like, are you a fighter? Like, do you see yourself in the fawn response? I'm curious.
I see myself in all of them. Mm-hmm. I've definitely been a fighter, but I've definitely in my younger years as a child was a fawner.
Yeah.
And in certain situations of growing up in London, I needed to be a fawn when there was other gangs around.
That's right.
And I had to fawn my way out and basically feel like, and exactly what you said was the shame of
Yes.
I had to do that and I couldn't fight. So what happened? I created the person that could stand up
That's
for
right.
myself. But really, if I'm going to be real, it was still the little boy that was scared in those situations of those. And that has really never changed, even though there is a bigger guy that can go into the world and feel somewhat safe in those situations when I don't feel safe. That little boy wants to come out and can automatically either go straight to fight or straight to fawn. Maybe not so much nowadays as compared to a few years ago, but that really resonated with me. Thank you for sharing that, Ingrid.
Well, yeah, thank you. I think it's powerful. I think, because I think a lot of women are socialized to be fawners, right? To be the caretakers, to be the appeasers, to be sweet, to smile. It's powerful when men can see themselves too in this response and share. Again, it's just an equal opportunity response, right? And I resonate with going and building a persona that's going to overcome your past, right? It's like, there's a reason I have 3 degrees and went and did all the things. And similarly, I still woke up in the middle of the night and I was like, wait a second, I'm still me. None of that stuff allowed me to override my human operating system, right? So eventually you have to attend to all of the parts, not just the ones that look kind of shiny on the outside or whatever we were looking for them to do for us.
So true. And what's happening to the nervous system when we go into this people-pleasing fawn response?
Well, I think that's another, interesting place where we didn't recognize it as a trauma response for so long, because it's really a hybrid response, right? So if we say that fight flight is mobilizing, it's that sympathetic, energy to literally fight or flee. And then you look at something like freeze. Now, freeze is all of that adrenaline, all of that elevated heart rate, but it's immobilized. You're kind of paralyzed at the same time. So there's all this energy, but it's stuck. That stuck place is the parasympathetic nervous system coming online, which is the rest and digest. So the fight flight is like the gas, the parasympathetic is the brake, right? So with freeze, you can kind of see they're on at the same time. And the same is true with the fawn response. We have just enough mobilization, just enough kind of energy, like to be socially engaged. Hi, how you doing? We're managing the moods of, those in charge, and we're doing the caretaking, we're doing the blending in. It's active in that way. The parasympathetic response is the down regulation internally. This is the dissociation. This is the depression. This is so much so that it really brings us oftentimes into denial, where sometimes you kind of know that you're fawning, and that's where you go, I'm not acting in accordance with my values. This does not feel good to me. Sometimes the denial is so strong, we genuinely believe, no, I like this person. No, this is a good person. This is why it contributes to this experience of perpetual toxic relationships that everyone else can kind of go, what are you doing, right? And you're like, what do you mean? This is my person. It's because that down regulation internally is a disconnect from self. And all of this is happening at the same time, which even as I say that, I go, yes, it has consequences, but look how genius that is. Look how genius that is. I hope that answers the question, like physiologically, what's happening.
It does. Oh. And how is it for those people that not fully understanding that they're in a fawn response, never heard the fawn response before? Yeah. How would that show up in their day-to-day life? Like, what are the sort of tick boxes that would say, I am sort of more swaying into the fawn response in this situation? Is there like a...
If it feels like you're the one who's perpetually managing all of your relationships, you might be fawning. If you have a ton of resentment that no one else is picking up the load, no one else is doing their work, you might be in a fawn response. If it's really hard to know, what do I believe? What do I think, right? This disconnect from self is sort of like, whatever you want to do, Ryan, wherever you want to go for dinner, right? We're very conflict avoidant. Again, because fight and flight makes it worse. Our body goes, I can't have a differing opinion. I can't speak up here. And so if you avoid conflict like the plague, I literally wouldn't unsubscribe from newsletters that I never subscribed to because I thought the sender was going to find out. And it was like, right, if you're afraid I'm going to get in trouble, chances are you might be in a fawn response. So these are some of the clues.
When it comes to relationships that we find ourselves in, if we're in a fawn response, does that mean that we would automatically be attracted to a fight or a flight or anything along those lines, or will you get two fawners together?
I think it's a yes and, but so I will say this. I never want to say that your fawning causes dysfunctional relationships or that that's always the norm, right? You can be abused without being a fawner. You're not responsible for someone else's behavior. And if, like me, you grew up in an environment where you were genuinely being exploited and manipulated and gaslighted, my body learned how to find safety in that context. In fact, when my fawn response came on board, I felt safer than at any other time, right? This now familiar feeling, it's so interesting. It feels almost powerful, right? Because now I'm taming a monster is what it feels like in my body, right? I'm taming a monster and I'm shifting his mood and look, he's coming for me, but now, right? As I do this motion, I'm also reminded that in Aikido, the martial art, they do not go for fight, attack head on. They blend with the attacker. It's very similar to the fawn response. I think it's an interesting way to visualize what that can look like. But going back for just a moment, so my body feels powerful and most protected when I'm in a fawn response. And so it makes sense that I become attracted to relationships that feel familiar in that way. It's almost like my currency resides in my ability to manage your nervous system, right? So it happened over and over and over and over in boyfriends, in friendships, with mentors. I mean, my whole life, essentially, I could map it out with the fawn response and go, yep, there it was again, there it was again. But that being said, fawners can come together. There's no sort of perfect combination, but I think that is a common presentation, right? You're used to being less than, right? There's less of me. I'm disconnected from self, right? There's this self-abandonment that happens. There's less of me in a full partnership where there's 100%, maybe I'm 20%. I kind of need someone who's going to take up the 80%. And there are a lot of people that are willing to take that space, right? My way or the highway. And suddenly you go, oh, a match made in heaven. We know how to do this dance because we've probably been doing it our whole lives. And then you go, why am I doing this again? Why am I dating, the same person with a different face?
It's that quote, my nervous system will always choose a familiar chaos over an unfamiliar calm.
100%. And we mistake it for like healthy chemistry. I kept saying, well, I just can't be attracted to someone I'm not attracted to, right? But I didn't know that my trauma response was in the driver's seat and it was just taking me along for the ride. And so I had to get in the driver's seat. Now I have my trauma responses, but they are not running the show on my relationships. I'm not living there 24/7.
And can chronic people pleasing lead to illness, burnout?
100%. Living in any any chronic trauma response can. I mean, we are not meant to live in survival mode. I've had migraines, psoriasis, exhaustion. My clients similarly, we see a whole host of physical symptoms. We call it mind body as though it's like two separate things. It's like mind body. It's all one organism, right? So we're not really teasing apart like one from the other. It's artificial.
Once you started to become aware of this fawn response, how did you start to lessen that survival strategy?
I think the biggest pivot for me was just understanding the context and the language of fawning as a trauma response. It reduced the shame and all those years and years of feeling like that. I got the messaging of like, well, just take care of yourself. Just set healthy boundaries, right? It sounded so obvious. And now I just felt stupid. I was like, what is wrong with me, right? And I think a lot of that is embedded in historically what we've called codependency and people pleasing. That both of these labels, they kind of extracted this term from the context and just put it on you as a person, right? And then they sort of talk about it like everyone's engaging in these reciprocal, healthy relationships and contexts. And then you go, well, yeah, if I'm in a healthy, reciprocal context where I'm valued and respected and it's mutual, it doesn't really make sense to self-abandon all the time. But most of us have not been living in those environments, and the body adapted. The body adapts. It's what it's meant to do. And so once I could see that, it sort of reduced the shame where I went, oh my gosh, I make sense. I make sense. I'm not stupid. I have a body. That's what this is. It's designed to protect me. Oh, it's been seeking safety. And then I go, so how can I restore, or for a lot of us, not restore, but like inhabit for the first time ever, a sense of safety in my own skin? And honestly, for me, a lot of that was sitting at my kitchen table, taking back my story. And there's a reason I called my book Believing Me, because I stopped waiting for anyone else to believe or validate my story, right? It was like, I can trust myself. I know what happened. I know what it did to me. I'm not waiting for anyone else to choose me anymore. I'm choosing me. That was a powerful way of stepping into, I got this. I'm now 50 years old, Ryan. Like, how the hell did that happen? But there are parts in me that are still 5 and 10 and 15 and 20, and they're lost, and they're like, well, we need help. And it's like, I finally show up as the person they've been waiting for their whole lives, right? To go, I'm here. I've got it, right? And I believe that there are so many different trauma modalities. I did a post about this morning. There's a lot of, people that aren't doing trauma-informed work that I worry are really prescribing a fawn response, if I'm honest, as therapists or even coaches. It's like they get to feel like they're good and helpful because they have fawning clients who are very compliant and want the therapist to feel good. And it turns into this like, So I say, do the work, but do the work with people that are not just trauma informed, but trauma trained, that have done their own work. I think that's another big piece of it. And I think you can ask people what that means to them, right? There's not a cookie cutter answer, but people should have one. They should have an answer for what trauma modalities do I use, and do I have personal experience with them? Because we're also talking about relational trauma, right? So this relationship of the person that you're working with, that has to be sort of really solid and really safe. If you're going to help someone find safety, this relationship better be super safe. So this is generally speaking sort of some of the ways in my experience.
Yeah, beautiful. And how can we know the difference between fawning or just being nice?
Oh, it's such a good question. I think I go back to that resentment piece, right? What are you actually thinking in the privacy of your own thoughts is an indicator. Some of it also might be just levels of stress and anxiety, right? We don't know that we're managing everyone else all the time, and so we're holding all of this. That can be an indicator, right? That like maybe it's not just niceness. You know what else I did? My shoulders were like this. So like, how does it feel to come into your own body? And I think for a lot of us, it becomes this practice. So it moves from an unconscious response that's chronic, it's all the time, it happens and then we get more information and we start to go, I wonder if I could be curious. That's where we do. We start with curiosity. I wonder if I could be curious how I really feel. And you might might even give yourself so much room, like, if I had permission to feel anything at all and no one had to know about it, what would I feel about a particular thing? And it's cultivating this relationship to ourselves, right? Dropping into the body, noticing even sensation, not figuring it out, not with the intention of wrapping it up with a bow and solving it, but in noticing what we're experiencing. That's the other thing that I love about trauma-informed work is we don't go, what do you think about that? We don't invite people back up to their heads where they're over-analyzing and spinning themselves out like I did on a couch for a million years. We go, what are you noticing now? What are you experiencing? We invite a relationship to self with curiosity, with self-compassion, with openness. There's no wrong answer.
Yeah. And is there any biggest misconceptions around the fawn response that we can sort of hear from day to day? Do you hear that in your work that keeps people stuck in that response?
Well, I think there's a lot of misconceptions. I think some of those being the like antiquated language around codependency. It's like all of the shame, right? It's sort of like just to stop doing that. But tell me the end of that question again, because it felt more nuanced and like it pointed to something else.
Yeah. So is there, I don't even remember what I said now, but is there a way that we can get stuck in this fawn response without really, I think that's what I said. I can't remember what I said, my brain just went, boop.
I don't think that was quite it. It was something. Maybe it'll come back. But
maybe it will come back. Do you think people pleasers can fully stop fawning though? Do you think that's something that we can start to go, where I'm noticing I'm doing this again? Or is it something that we always sort of have to manage?
I think that it's always going to be there. And it's always going to be there because we're always going to have a body, right? Like there's appropriate fawning, just like there's appropriate fleeing and appropriate fighting. We don't want to live in a fight response all the time. Like that makes sense to us, but we're not asking people to disavow themselves of any sort of anger or agency or, right? Like there's such good juicy stuff in there that it's like the heartbeat of sort of having a voice and having a say and being at the table, right? Similar with fawning. It's sort of like, listen, I am still a therapist. I still love taking care of people, but I don't feel like it's all about them, but it's all my responsibility anymore, right? There's a little bit more of collaboration that's happening, not just with my clients, but in my life in general. I'm not overly responsible for people, but I do enjoy, offering what's coming up for me in response to them or being generous. I think a lot of fawners have these very empathic, lovely relational qualities. We don't lose those. We lose doing them at our expense all the time, right? So we start to exist in the equation. That's the piece that changes. But listen, if someone's coming for me and it's a dark alley and I can go, hey, what's going on? And I can be really like sweet and relational and they back away. Well, I thank God for my trauma response in that moment, right? So it's not about never fawning. That I really want to be clear about. It's not even possible. There's no perfection here. And if you've lived in a chronic response, chances are that's probably gonna, that's the muscle that's gonna want to be used. And then sometimes we can go, oh, wait, I wonder if I can do this a little bit differently. And oftentimes over time, we can. Yeah.
And something that I noticed in my own journey was that once I started to say no and start to speak up and speak my truth in certain situations, was the tremendous amount of guilt that I would feel for meeting my own needs. And maybe others can resonate with that. And is there anything that you recommend that when we do start to feel that guilt because we've started to speak our truth, that we can start to move through a little bit easier?
I love just that you're naming it, because in some ways, like the way I used to say it for myself was, it feels mean. It feels mean, right? And so almost I go, if it feels mean to me, chances are I'm moving in a healthy direction, right? So this is true for trauma healing generally, but a lot of us have to learn how to tolerate sort of normal, healthy amounts of discomfort. For a lot of us, if you have complex trauma, our trauma responses are like guarding off from any potential even potential threat way down the line, right? Oh, I don't want to feel bad. It's not to say that we don't feel bad. We feel like shit a lot of the time, but that's because we're living in this mired in trauma response and trauma. But part of then growing into more space is, look, even as I move my hands out, I go, oh, there's a lot more in here than there ever was before. And that's not just the joy. I wish it was. It's not just the exhale. It's also I have to tolerate some discomfort. You know, there's this saying, when we stop people pleasing, people will not be pleased. It's true. It's true. We don't want to hear that, right? It's like devastating. What do you mean? And yet we went not pleased, or however you want to say it, for most of our lives. And so we're allowed, we have permission. And in my experience, as I start to not prioritize other people quite to the extent that I have and start to privilege a little more of my experience, this feels like shit. I feel guilty. It feels mean. But you know what does feel so good? Being a whole person in the world. Really having my own back. That feels so good that to me, it makes this part worth it. And these, you know, it's not completely simultaneously, but it kind of is, right? Like the way that I feel about myself, the way that I don't have to gaslight myself anymore. Like, what's the matter with you? That was painful, right? I'd rather have, you know, Resmaa. Are you familiar with My Grandmother's Hands, the book by Resmaa? I never say his last name correctly. Makinem? Ugh, forgive me. He has this saying in this book, largely talking about racialized trauma in America. There's a difference, and he's a somatic experiencing practitioner. There's a difference between clean pain and dirty pain, okay? Dirty pain is this like self-gaslighting, you're a loser, you're broken, knock it off, take care of everyone, stay small, dysfunctional relationships, right? Dirty pain is where I live for so long. Clean pain is, oh, this feels mean, this feels like they're gonna be mad at me. It's clean pain that is leading to resolution. It's growing pains, and there's a difference, and you can start to discern the difference the more that you lean in and you start to go, all right, well, this at least is for transformation, and I'll choose the clean pain every time.
Yeah, wow. Yeah. And I think that's a little bit of how I started to understand that I was fawning, was when I felt guilty.
Yeah.
I would say to myself, guilt is just my needs being met.
Good. I want to feel that. Guilt is just my needs being met.
And it was the only way that I could sort of understand. And of course, I know guilt is also a healthy mechanism to understand certain behaviors, but 98% of the time it was that I'm meeting a need of mine that I didn't feel deserving of meeting.
That's right. And the other thing I think is helpful with this, particularly when you're just starting, is who are the safe people in your life? And can you run it by them? Hey, this feels mean. I feel so guilty. I feel like I should be doing X, Y, and Z. And, you know, I don't always want to make a decision by committee. I don't think that's, you know, necessarily the way to go. But sometimes with these things, it feels so new and it feels so real in our body. It feels like, no, this is mean. My body is screaming at me, right? It's really, I'm just triggered. And I don't know that it's an opportunity for growth. And so turning to the trusted people in your life, you know, hey, can I get your take on this? And that has been so helpful. It's like I borrow their nervous system because they have more flexibility. And I go, okay, well, I want what you have, so I'm gonna do it.
Yeah, and Dr. Ingrid, I just want to say thank you so much for sharing all of that wisdom. Most of the time I was so engaged listening, I forgot, actually, I need to ask questions at the same time here. So I just want to say thank you so much. Thank you for your work. And I know that your book is also due to come out as well. Can you share where anyone can, you know, connect with you and, you know, pre-order this book as well?
Well, that's so kind. Thank you for inviting me to have this conversation. I feel like our communities and our work there's a lot of like kindred spirit, kindred space happening there. So I'm grateful to be here today. And people can find me in all the places at Instagram, at Ingrid Clayton, PhD. I have a Substack that's doing longer form stuff with the same name, Ingrid Clayton, PhD. And the book is coming out this fall, and the pre-order is available, I think, wherever you get books. So it's called Fawning, and it's on my website too, all the good stuff. So thanks.
Beautiful. Can you give us little snippets of what's going to be in the book? What type of stuff? Or is it top secret?
No, it's not top secret. I can definitely share that I have 7 clients that I've seen between 1 and 16 years that have handed me their life experience with the Fawn response, what it was like and what it did to them and sort of what healing has looked like. It's not like a traditional self-help book in that way, where there's these sort of composite characters and it feels like a math problem from third grade. It's like there's such a depth to these stories, and then we really explore what all of the signs are and what healing looks like through actual lived experience. So I'm so grateful to my clients for trusting me and allowing me to use their actual experience to really elevate and explore what this thing looks like in different bodies from different walks of life. And so I really hope people see themselves reflected. I hope they see themselves reflected without any of the shame. There's just so much room to exist and to breathe on these pages for me. And I can't wait until people can read it. I'm so excited.
Yeah, beautiful. I'm excited for you. I'm definitely going to be picking it up. Something that just came to me then when you were sharing that was something that I tended to find, and I've seen with particular people I work with, that once they start to come out of the fawning and they start to notice that, oh, I'm speaking my truth and I'm starting to share that, and this guilt that comes up through into my body, that it sort of would sometimes flip like a pendulum swing into more of a fight response for a period.
Yeah.
Because it goes from this fawn pendulum of like, I don't say anything, to now I feel like I have to say everything.
Yeah.
But because this is my own experience, because fawning was uncomfortable, I had to do it through aggression, a form of aggression. Not aggression in the sense of violence, but in the sense of like to speak it with tenacity in order to get, it was a protective layer. Like it was like, oh, I have to say it this way or it's not going to get heard in that sense. Is that something that you've seen with yourself or seen?
Common. So common. So first of all, we have to reconnect our ability to feel this fire of the fight response. It's actually an important aspect of coming out of fawn, right? So to your point, a lot of times we overshoot it. But what I say there is give yourself a lot of grace. This process is messy. It's not linear, right? Just like all trauma healing. It's not like bit by bit and better and better. It's like 4 steps forward and 8 back and everything in between, and you're just going to keep growing and changing. And again, if you have those people in your life, I say tell them about the fawn response. Tell them, I'm going to start holding on to myself and it feels very scary and I don't know how to do it and it might be messy, right? So you can start to create safety even for the mess of it in your core relationships anyway. And the other piece that we can attend to, right, with relational trauma, a lot of us didn't learn that all relationships are about rupture and repair. Rupture and repair. We only got the rupture part of the deal, right? The repair is like foreign to most of us. So whether it's, oh God, I fawned again, I said yes when I really meant no. Hey, can we have a do-over? I realize I just reflexively said yes, and I realize I don't have the space or the interest or whatever. You can go back and repair it. You can do the same if you overshot with a fight response. I really wanted to say no and I did it in this mean way, and I'm so sorry. I did not mean to do it in a mean way. I wanted to say what I mean and not say it mean, and that did not happen, right? So you can always repair. It doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be perfect out of the gates. Let it be messy, and always come back to self-compassion. Like, look at me, growing this flexibility into my whole system, because it's brave and it's hard and it's amazing and it's worth it. But we have to be kind to ourselves along. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's like this moment where we decide, I'm going to start speaking my truth, but when it's to the original imprints of how we learn to survive, and they don't like you're not people pleasing or setting those boundaries or speaking your truth, that's, I think, when it's to the people you need to, because your heart's pounding and it's like, oh, I'm feeling this.
Hey, don't start there. I want to tell people, don't start there.
Please, thank you. That's what I was going to ask you. Is there something that we don't start in those relations? Start like sort of on the outside circle, like people around you, and then starting to work your way into that. You've built up confidence in the saying no's of things.
We don't learn by someone telling you, oh, this is a good idea. Okay, I'm going to go do that. We learn through experience. So you have to give your body the experience of not fawning and going, I survived. Like the body has to know, not the head. Like it's not really going to hurt you. The body's like, yes, it is. Screw you. So you got to give the body a different experience. So you start with like, oh my gosh, they brought the wrong order to the table. I never want to make the server feel bad, but can I say, oh, I asked for mashed potatoes and you brought me French fries? It sounds so silly. I guarantee guarantee you it's not, because if this stuff, like really, it could make me cry, Ryan. If this stuff is triggering to you and it feels like survival, that's what your body's dealing with. The words might be about mashed potatoes, but your body is like, I'm not allowed. I'm not allowed. So start there. Start there, right? It matters. It counts. I can't tell you how many times people say to me, well, this is really small or this is really insignificant. And my body goes, no, it's not. It's major. It's major. You know, when I first went on social media talking about complex trauma, I really did it from this place where I'm not going to keep pretending that I'm Dr. Ingrid Clayton, right? And I have it all figured out, right? Like that's a very good marketing message. Okay. It's also a lie. And for most folks actually. And I was like, I'm going to just tell the truth, which is, yes, I'm a clinical psychologist. Yes, I have all this training in trauma. And yes, I'm really just crawling out from it like myself right now. And I need to be the expert and the survivor and the one who finds it like funny in a really dark way and the one who's like irreverent. And can I be all of me in one place? And I swear to you, I believed that doing so would tank my career. I was certain I cannot be silly and irreverent and really prioritize me as a survivor and like telling my person, it's going to tank my career. But I came to this point where I was like, I don't care. I guess we'll see. Maybe I'm not meant to be a psychologist then, right? Because it's more important for me to be all of me in one place than it is for me to present a particular way. But boy, did my body have to face that consequence, right? And of course, it's not what happened. I was never more sought after once I became like a real person. You know, go figure. But that's the feeling in the body is that, oh, the consequences are going to be big. My livelihood, my entire life, that's what I'm going to risk here. But I said, yeah, that's what I have to do. And it was the best feeling ever because the more that I leaned into all of me and the more that people saw all of me, the more they could respond to all of me, right? This is that other piece where we go, oh, that part where you're actually being all of yourself, it feels so good. It just kept encouraging me to go, I'm on the right path. I'm on the right path. And I might lose some folks along the way, but they're not folks that are meant to be in my inner circle. So that's okay.
I can resonate. Resonate.
Yeah.
And it's something you said earlier that I'd love to finish on was that you said, it matters. You said the word, it matters. It matters to speak up and share about the mashed potatoes or the French fries.
Oh.
And what I'm really taking from that is you matter. Your needs matter. And that's something that is a little bit of a mantra for people that can be in that response. It's like, I matter. It's okay for me because it's easy to go, oh, don't worry about it. It's all good. Don't worry. And just bin it off. But no, I wanted mashed potato. I didn't want French fries, you know,
Yes. And then those inner 5-year-old, 10-year-old, 15-year-old, all those parts of me that still feel like I don't matter. They're listening. They're listening. And they just heard you advocate for our needs. Again, that's the experiential piece is they go, maybe we do. That's why it matters. It's literally changing us on a cellular level. You walk out of that restaurant a changed person. Your body will never forget what it felt like to take care of yourself. And now it has that experience. And so next time there's an opportunity, the body might go, it worked okay last time. I wonder what would happen here, right? And it just starts to build. It's like this exponential growth that has to start somewhere. And again, I don't want to pretend, I know, but I don't want to pretend that it's just growing and better and did it, because that's a lie too, right? It's this thing. But over time, it is just about more and more exponential freedom and flexibility to be all of who you are in a way that is so self-honoring. It's the most important work I've ever done.
Thank you for also sharing your vulnerability and your humanness on your Instagram page, because I think that's so important. And I'm so glad that you decided to go down that route rather than that I know everything about it and I'm fixed. Because it's like this, it's a bit of a dance between, for me personally, it's like, can I share my truth and do it in a non-forceful way and be okay with just that being that? That's really like that. Oh, am I feeling safe in this? Can I hold this guilt in my system? And as that was doing that, my capacity to hold more got bigger, rather than being able to, and like you said, it's not linear. Some days and certain people, it can still go, and my capacity is really small to be able to hold that. But it is one of those things that drip by drip, the way it was created is drip by drip. I can start to create more capacity to hold more that's in the system. But Ingrid, I just want to say thank you again. And I'm looking forward to the book, and I'll speak to you soon.
Okay, wonderful. Thanks, Ryan.